Hello, everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Richard Unger. Now, Richard, I don't really, we haven't really sort of known each other that long. Just a couple of emails, short correspondence. But he popped up during a conversation I had with Narendra Das. If you refer back to a previous video where he was talking about the Nadi pulse system, and at the end of the conversation, we just drifted onto the topic, obviously extended into fingerprints. And then he mentioned Richard's book and said it was well worth getting it. I got a copy and then contacted Richard and he agreed to do this interview. So that's the kind of background behind it. So I'm sure you'll be able to expand on the story of how you got into it. How do you like to be? Are you kind of like chorologist or like hand analyst or fingerprint? How do you sort of see yourself or how do you describe yourself?
I don't really mind what label people use. I'm more than happy to respond to palm reader. I do know that there's an association with fortune telling in that title. I call myself a hand analyst, but I don't really dwell on the title. The people who come to see me, in general, have been referred to me. They've heard about what I did with their spouse, their best friend. A quarter of the people that see me are referred in by a therapist who wants me to read their hands, and then they can bring what comes in the reading back into the therapy process. So the title, on one level, doesn't matter. On another level, it's very important. Andrew, hand reading is not well regarded in the Western world. Can you believe that? A tool is absolutely precise and useful. And again, it's a more precise tool than therapists have available for understanding what's going on with people. And yet in Western culture, it's just disregard. It's not worthy of serious consideration. It's not even, I've looked at it and it's dumb and I don't like it. No. It's all the way, it's so far over there that it's not worthy of consideration. I find that shocking that I'm still alive and that's the case.
What would be why do you think it's gone down that path? What's the biggest problem?
There's several big problems. One is that in the Middle Ages, it became a capital offense to read hands. And then the Roma people were the last ones in Europe who were still reading hands. And the Roma people are, I've spent, 5 years in Europe. The Roma people are treated like blacks in Alabama in 1930s. And I might be exaggerating a little. I don't think they're getting lynched on trees. But even in very polite conversations with, university professors and stuff, people just talk about the Roma in ways that are embarrassing to me to even be in the room and listen. And hands and what are labeled gypsies, hands and gypsies are just immediately put together. There are Saturday Night Live will have a comedy sketch and there'll be a hand reader saying something and everybody's laughing uproariously about it. It's just not even, there's no protection for it. It's like the punching bag of the world. I don't know. I did my the beginning of my hand reading career. I've been reading hands back in college, and for 10 years before I did it as my full-time occupation. I was living in Texas, so I'm living in Texas, and not only do I have a New York accent, but I read hands. Oh my word! The abuse that came my way was just. I was astounded at the abuse. If you want to tell me that you think what I'm doing is wrong, by the way, I love to hear that. If you're well-versed, if you know what I'm doing and you think I'm doing X, Y, and Z wrong, my word, tell me exactly what I could do better. I'm interested in your feedback. Let's go down that point by point. Did I do this wrong? How'd you come to the conclusion that this was wrong? Have you researched it? Do you know more about me because you're a clinical psychologist and you think I don't understand what's going on the right way? I welcome feedback like that. And I would welcome even 180-degree opposite argument with me if it's well informed. But just calling me a name and dismissing me, me, palmistry. They dismissed me, so what? I got dismissed because my accent sounded bad, and I was trying to buy furniture at a furniture store. They wouldn't talk to me. My word! But nonetheless, that handwriting gets thrown to the curb like that. By the way, as I'm talking about this, are you familiar? Are you well read in psychology circles? Have you read the story of Jung and Freud, etc.?
Yeah, their background.
I love doing research. You could see behind me a piece of the largest collection of palmistry books in North America, or right back here. I love research and I love reading in the medical journals. But Freud's father was thrown to the curb. He's walking with his daddy. He's like 12 years old, I forget the exact age, something like that. He's walking in Vienna, and some guy comes down the sidewalk and forces his father to walk in the curb where the stuff that comes out of people's houses, the sewage gets dumped, and, in the street is, the sewage. His father was forced to walk in the sewage because he was Jewish. Get on there. And he took his son by the hand, and they had to walk there. This is in a footnote in his famous book on dreams. And I'm saying, now I understand Freud's attitude towards this, and that. He watched his father get treated like that. And, now he's doing this, and that in the world and leaving his imprint behind. Anyway, handwriting got thrown to the curb in the Western world, not in the Eastern world, in the Western world.
Yeah, I mean, my background's more kind of Ayurvedic. I like the Indian tradition. So in Ayurveda, we're taught to use the hand as a sort of diagnostic tool. You can use anything. I mean, they have this book, which is the 6 limbs. So you have your head, the trunk, the 2 arms, 2 legs. So there are signs on all of these things, and they can all be used to some extent. But the hand is a particularly good one because Ayurvedically, we see it not changing so much throughout the person's life. I mean, in the sort of shape, size, that kind of thing, obviously from childhood to maturity. But so it's a good tool, and it's useful looking at the nails, the sort of skin texture. And then you're moving into more the astrological analysis, where you're looking at particular planets tied to fingers, and then the span of the hand, or how the hand is used and things like that, or the fingers. Now, what interested me about your work was you've specialized, or your book, Life Prints, it goes very much into the use of the fingerprints, which, as we've just discussing before we came on, isn't really something that there's not really any literature I could find, any real a lot of old ancient literature on it. So perhaps you could elaborate on how you got into that sort of very specific part of the hand reading.
Okay, let me take a step backwards before moving right to your question.
Okay.
So fingerprints represents about a third of what I look at in somebody's hands. There's hand shape and lines. And you can't understand the fingerprints, and I'm glad to talk about fingerprints. I love that. But the fingerprints isolated from the hand shape and lines, you're going to be wrong about your interpretation a whole bunch of times because you're out of context. You're not understanding the meaning because you're isolating one piece of the hand. It's like listening to 1/3 of a trial and assuming that the guy is guilty or innocent. We haven't had the other witnesses yet.
Yeah,
it's not fair. And by the way, the hand shape stuff, which I love, the hand shape can change over time. And the lines can change quite dramatically in a relatively short amount of time. So I'll take slight issue with you there. Back to the fingerprints. One of the great things about fingerprints is they cannot change. So if they're a map to anything, and I suggest they're very much so, an important map to what your possible destiny can be, your most exalted, most meaningful life, is a map of that in your fingerprints. The fact that it cannot change is mind-bending when you start looking at the implications. So, Andrew, I'm reading the hands of a clinical psychologist, and I've read a lot of hands for therapists through the years. And I'm reading for a clinical psychologist, and I'm describing something in my Bronx, New York way, moving my hands, and I'm telling a story.
It's all important. It sets the scene, so it's all good.
And clinical psychologist says, oh, yes, that behavior. That's the XYZ syndrome, whatever the clinical psychology title is. And it all started in kindergarten when this happened and that happened and this happened. And I say well and good. And I didn't know that you had that name for it. But I'm seeing it in your fingerprints, which preceded kindergarten by 5 or 6 years. And the clinical psychologist, well, maybe it was what happened when I was 2, when my father, my mother, the breastfeeding, whatever. And I go, yeah, but it preceded that by 2.5 years. The clinical psychologist was sitting in cognitive dissonance because that's one of their phrasings, was sitting, there was no way to hold on to what I was saying and keep the view that she had learned to use that is the basis of her professional career. Because if it is in the fingerprints, and the fingerprints were formed between the 16th and 18th week after conception, there have been no events that formed the pattern of behavior that I was describing by looking at her fingerprints. Either I was making it up out of thin air and just got lucky. That's a hard thing to believe because I was really specific about the behavior. Or it was not caused by any of the events that she would list as an event, because it preceded her birth by over 5 months. And so she sat there in disbelief. How can I? So one of the things about the fingerprints then is that they're unaffected. You win the lottery, you lose the lottery. You have 10 marriages, you have no marriages. The fingerprints aren't going to budge. There's a map in your fingerprints, and if you've read Life Prints, you know my theory on this. There's a map in the fingerprints as to the person you can be. Whether you be that person or you don't be that person, well, the fingerprints, they're just sitting there. There's just a picture. And I've learned to decode that picture. So I call that your life purpose. And I put life purpose in capitals because when I do life purpose workshops, which I've been doing for over 40 years now, when I do life purpose workshops and I ask people, what's your life purpose? They'll say, well, I'm passionate about, especially on the West Coast of the US where I live. Well, my passion is basketball. It has nothing to do with life purpose. But my passion is this. Or, I'm a mother and I take care of my kids. And I go, that's great. I'm a father. I took care of my kids. They're all like older than you now. So it's part of my life. It's part of a lot of people's lives. But it's not what you came to do in this lifetime. I consider the map in your fingerprints to be a soul contract from a soul level, however you would define that, somehow outside of time. There's a picture that exists, an exalted destiny possibility, I call it. A destiny possibility. Whether you get there or not, who knows? Whether you live the life that I could see in your fingerprints, living that life makes you feel on purpose with life. It gives you a deep sense of meaning. It's a meaning map. It's not the same as a Myers-Briggs personality profile. It's not the same as a psychological profiling tool. The fingerprints are not. The fingerprints stand in a different category, a soul psychology category, I like to call it. And it's operational in a person's life, whether they realize it or not. There's like a finger of destiny. It's not like the fact I would talk to you at this time on this date was pre-written somewhere, or maybe it is, and I don't know. That's not what the fingerprints say. But my fingerprints are about inspirational communications to the masses. So this is what, if I knew fingerprints and I met my parents back then, and I looked at their kids' one-day-old fingerprints, I could say, your son, if he does a good job and he's living the life that will make him feel most fulfilled, is doing public inspirational communications, and he's doing it all the time. Because the more he does that, the more he's living his exalted destiny. And with that in mind, mom and dad, you could do everything possible to help him be a good communicator, to help him become inspired, and to applaud whatever inspires him, even if it's some stupid thing like a 5-year-old being inspired by who knows what, a 5-year-old thing. The more you could do that, then you'll be saving him therapy time later as an adult. So that fingerprint map tells me where you can be going in life that will make you feel most fulfilled. And your hand shape and lines tells me the the material available for you to live that destiny, or potentially live that destiny, because half the people I read for aren't anywhere close to the life that is marked in their fingerprints. And they're numbed out to this degree, that degree, that degree, because to not be living your destiny robs you of spiritness, however, whatever phrasing you would use.
So just to get us sort of clear on the process, then, could you, let's say somebody comes to see you, they sit down, this is the first time you've met them, they show you the hands. So could you sort of take us through the process of what are you sort of looking for first? If the fingerprints are kind of the potential, but the hands of the vehicle, what's carrying you towards that? How do you dissect your subject? I mean, what are you looking at? So are you first interested in the shape, or is it the lines and then the fingerprints are last, or do you look at the fingerprints first? And then
so some of my students have a system where they always look at this first. I don't do that. And I deliberately do not do that. Instead, I sit there and I wait a second and I let my eye do the work. I've looked at over 60,000 pair of hands now, Andrew. That's a lot of hands. Do the math on that. How many hands I've got? I must be 200 years old by now. But
well, you're just very efficient.
I'm very efficient. And I do not want to direct my eye. My eye knows what to do. So I just wait a second and my eye will land somewhere in the hand. This is what usually happens. And then I follow my eye where it wants to go. And my eye tends to pick either something that is weird. You know, I've not seen that before. For me to look at your hands and go, wow, I haven't seen anything like that before. You know, you've gone way out of your way to build your hands in some unique way. And if it confounds the hand reader in me, I find it just stokes my curiosity and I'll go down that rabbit hole. And then how can you have a marking like this? And what's the context of it? How can this marker show up on this type of hand? That can't be. And yet there it is in front of me. So I follow the breadcrumbs in effect. Before I'm done, I'll take a minute, probably 2 minutes. I'll take a minute. I have a hand map. I'm taking notes. I'm going to leave that with my client at the end of the session. And I've written down the key markers I'm probably going to talk about. I've put together the basic story, usually in under 5 seconds. I have an idea of what the story is, what the good news possibility is for you, what the super good news possibility is for you, what the bad news possibility with somebody built like this, what could go wrong and how bad could it look? And specifically, what would that look like? And if you're in any of that, how you got there and therefore what it would take to extract you from that. I usually have that down in the first 10 seconds or something. Again, I've done a lot of hands and it's what I do every day. If I'm not there in 20 seconds, I'm intrigued. What? I don't know what's going on here? Well, I still take my notes. And occasionally, after looking over everything, I still don't have the basics, again, of what the good news potential, bad news potentials, how you get into one or the other. Sometimes people are just confusing. Have you ever noticed people can be like
hellishly confusing? Yeah.
like, what's going on with Fred? I've known him for decades. Nobody has a clue as to what's going on with Fred. So same thing with the hands. But then I also want to ask the person if there's any particular thing they came in to find out about. And I'll start talking to them. And I've put together, I like to use the metaphor, I have a palmistry strategy room and I'm writing on the whiteboard and I'm circling this over here. And my conclusion is, let's say my conclusion is Fred has relationship difficulties. And, you know, he grew up in a family with relationship difficulties and relationship difficulties are consuming him. Let's say I'm thinking that, and it's on the whiteboard in my mythical palmistry strategy room. I don't know that for a fact. And I'm telling my students this all the time. I do not know that for a fact. I know that as a premise. I know that as an hypothesis. Let's say that this guy sitting in front of me had a mind-blowing, chakra-opening visit with Jesus moment 6 months ago, and like everything is different. Or he's Scrooge, and the angels came to visit, and he asked for another chance to fix his life. And I'm looking at his hands, and this is a mess over here. But if I had seen his hand 6 months ago, maybe this is half the mess that it was 6 months ago, and things are repairing. I don't have that context. Also, for all I know, he fell out of the turnip truck and got raised by who knows who, and grew up in a way that I had never considered. Until I know the context of the person's life, I do not know for sure. And even then, I might not know for sure. However, I can see what the exalted possibility is. I can see if things are problematic and Fred's in trouble, I can delineate the ways that Fred gets in trouble. And if I can do that, that's also delineating the path out of that trouble.
How much of the, I mean, I know in your book at the beginning, you give quite a nice introduction about how you got into all this. And you talk about you'd read a lot of literature, you were studying a lot of palmistry books. Like you say, behind you have a massive library. How much of what you're still doing now, do you think psychological or sort of bubbling in the background, is that planetary astrological information? Have you kind of gone beyond that and now you're not thinking in terms of planet? Or because I noticed, some of your, when you're talking about the sort of various structures, you're saying like little finger communication and that's sort of mercurial. I mean, are you still getting this planetary stuff in there, or have you kind of moved beyond all that?
I haven't moved beyond it. And I don't know if I can call myself well-versed. I'm conversant in astrologies. If you're an astrologer and you're telling me about the session you just did with Bob this morning, and, this trine that, and the moon was in the third house, blah, 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 and it was squared with this, I can follow. It's like, well, my German is getting worse since I haven't been to Switzerland for a few years now. But it's like you're talking in a language that I can understand, but I have trouble speaking it. So I can follow. And it's in the background, similar to the Enneagram and other things I've studied. They're in the background. I've learned these things. And some of them I found super intriguing and useful. Palmistry and astrology shares a common nomenclature. So, there's the Jupiter finger. And a lot of what I've read in astrology books overlaps, and then a third doesn't with the hand. That's not good language for Jupiter in the hand. But the fact that there's a common nomenclature and a lot of it does correspond, that's intriguing. That's very intriguing. And Pluto stuff corresponds exactly. Saturn stuff corresponds exactly. I learned about Saturn and Pluto more from astrology books than palmistry books. There's a lot more astrology books than palmistry books. And 95% of the palmistry books are written for a newcomer. And part of the problem, you asked what was the difficulty with hands. Part of the problem is that it's hard to make a living as a hand reader. And at least in the Western world, again, the Eastern world is different. But in the Western world, it's hard to make a living as a hand reader, and it's hard to sustain making a living over years on end. It's one thing to get excited from a course and you do a bunch of readings of your friends and they send their friends, and for a few months, you have clientele. What are you going to do 3 years from now? What are you going to do 7 years in, 17 years in? Since hands are not even on the fringe of acceptability in the Western world, they're not even on the fringe. How are you going to make a living? And because there's not enough people making a living, there's not enough people to write books for people who are advanced and have been making a living for a long time at hands. I would love to read another palmist take on Pluto stuff in the hands, but there's not enough hand readers for somebody to spend their life to write that book for the 17 people to potentially read it. And that's if everyone of that group read it. So for the last 25 years, I've been writing textbooks in hand analysis. And my field has been hampered by the lack of a textbook. The best textbook in hands was written in the 1800s, and it's way out of date, go figure. and half of it is not even right. But the guy was writing in the 1800s, more power to him. And there's no textbook, there's no training programs really. I came to California to start a school. I wanted to learn hands, and I looked everywhere. There was no place to learn hands. And I found some place, and I drove my car. I was a college student. I drove my rickety $25 jalopy to take the class, and the guy turned out to be an astrologer. He didn't know as much as I knew about hands, and I had read 3 books. He knew this was the heartline, and then he just kind of like asked you your birthday and made stuff up. And okay, maybe he helped people, but that's not, that's not hand reading. That's something else. And so, I started a school, I trained people, I'm writing textbooks. I would love to see hands be regarded appropriately as the tool, the self-awareness tool that it is. Again, a quarter or so, whatever, of my clientele are therapy recommendations where the client plays the recording of their session for the therapist who takes notes, and then they follow up on that stuff. And then the therapist writes me back saying, thank you, you gave me good perspective and good leverage on how to work with Fred's problem. You nailed it, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't consider it from this angle like you did. The hands are such a cool tool for doing that. And at this moment, it's like barely known, by 11 people. That's crazy. That's just insane.
Yeah, even in when I was studying in Sri Lanka, I mean, I just happened upon this guy by chance who happened to be really good. A bit like yourself, he did it very intuitively. He didn't really have any system per se. I said, "Can you teach me how to do it?" Yeah, come. He said, "Every day we do half an hour," but there was no system. He told me so many interesting things, but he had no real system. He just looked a bit like you, kind of studied it for a second, and then he just made 1 point or 2 points.
1 second. This is hand analysis 101. It's not even 102 and 103. Working backwards, it's extremely systematic. Look at the scale of what's going on here.
Wow.
So the training program that I've been teaching a 3-year training program. I founded the International Institute of Hand Analysis in '85. We had our 40th birthday party just a few weeks ago. And there's a 3-year training program. And what I've been doing is converting that 3-year program into textbooks for people to study on their own. And to do that, I had to eliminate a bunch of stuff, and then I had to organize the material. And I had to do it in such a way that you're studying on your own as opposed to being part of a group where you could raise your hand, ask a question, and then you could have group feedback as well as feedback from the teacher. And I try to capture the essence of that classroom training in you can study this, you can learn it. And here is lesson 1, here's lesson 2, here's lesson 3. This is what you need to know. This is your homework. But you can't learn hands from a teacher. You can't learn hands from a textbook. You can learn hands by doing it. And so imagine if I try to explain to you, here's how you ski. That's good. That's fine. Until you put on mittens and get cold and try to get down the hill without dying, you're not skiing, no matter how much you studied the videos. So there is a systematic, I combine what I consider to be an extremely systematic approach. But at the same time, I'm being in the moment intuitive, and I'm letting my eye do the work. And here's my metaphor for hands. You've got somebody as wild and crazy and completely out of the box insane as Miles Davis. And some people like his music and some people don't, but he's like on the upper echelon of jazz greats in history. However, as a kid, he's studying his notes. He's doing his scales. He's learning classical trumpet. And he's doing that umpteen hours a day, day after day after day after day after day. He got solidified in the basics. And then he does his, as an adult, he does his leaps of phantasmagoria, whatever you would call it. But it's not just somebody like doing this. It's not like a small kid pounding the piano and then making a joke about it. He is a well-trained classicist who goes in his leaps of imagination. So that's one of the things I love about hands. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and it gives me an opportunity to be steeped in the basics, and then in my session with you, allow whatever's going to happen, and ride the horse the way it's going.
So you're saying basically there is you have got a formula that you will use when you're approaching somebody, but if you see something that overrides all that, you'll just jump straight to the chase and you'll kind of do it.
I'm trusting my intuition implicitly, but I'm also telling the person I'm reading for, you've got this marker here and that marker here, and this is what that means in my system, come to your conclusion. But, as I'm talking to you, I'm remembering a song that I haven't thought of for years. And there's no reason for me to be thinking about this other than the fact that I'm in a reading and you're my readee. So let me tell you the song. I'm not going to sing it to you. You're off the hook on that. But why are these lyrics showing? What do they mean to you? And if a reading goes well, I'm in deep conversation with my readee. And it's not a lecture from one person to the other. It's a conversation, and we're exploring the possibilities for this person's life. Again, I've seen these lines before. I've seen this handshake before. I've seen fingerprints with a similar message as yours. And I have my theory as to what all this means. But I didn't know that you grew up in the circus in Sri Lanka. I didn't know. Who knows what I don't know? I don't know that you have 3 different wives who don't know about each other. I didn't know. There's not a line for that in the hands. And it's only in that collaborative exploration that the best possibilities of hand analysis come out. By the way, some readies won't tell me anything. They just sit there and they're not going to say a word. If I say, okay, how old are you? I'm not telling you. Okay. Do you have a family? Do you work? I'm not telling you. Okay. I'll just talk, and then they say, thank you. Here's the payment. Thank you for the sheet. They're out the door, and I'm going like this. That happens too. That doesn't happen as much as it used to. But when I lived in Texas, that happened a bunch of times.
Well, I'll remember to avoid Texas. So
I love Texas. Don't avoid Texas. Texas is wonderful. I really do love Texas.
Can I ask you about, there's 3 things that sort of interest me. When I was learning it, the guy who taught me, he said that he was very interested in the parvata, the mountains at the base of the fingers. Now, I've spoken to other palmistry people since here, and they all go, that's all a bunch of hooey. I don't use any of those. They're irrelevant. So how much of that factors into what you're doing, and do you find it's relevant? And also in the Indian system, they're very into their symbols. So they're looking for these are like boons, if you like, special gifts that you've been given. So do symbols play any part in what you're doing at all? Are you looking anything?
Let me answer your first question.
Yeah, let's back. I tend to ask too many questions because I get excited about this, you see.
Well, excitement is good. I like excitement. So those are called the mounds, and there are 7 mounds on the palmar surface. And the guy who wrote the textbook in the 1890s, William Benham, based a lot of his system on the looking of the 7 mounds. And everybody I've met who's been doing palmistry for more than a decade and sustained themselves use the Benham textbook as their Bible, if you will, as part of their training. And the thing is, it's not that it doesn't work. It's unwieldy, it's cumbersome, it's awkward to use. I've met people who still use it, and they do a good job with it, they say. I found it unwieldy. Most of the systems I've studied, I would take notes and I would try out everything I read. I mean, here are people, they lived on the planet, they left the book, they're gone, and here's their book. This is what they learned from reading hands for decades. And I would try out everything that there was. Some of it was true, a lot of it wasn't, blah, blah, blah. But that system I find unwieldy. And I found it particularly unwieldy in this case, that case, in this case, there's no need for me to go into it. So I don't so much find it as wrong as not particularly useful, except in certain cases where something just jumps out and I go, oh yeah, that goes right back to the Venom system. There it is. So that was, let's see, that's your first question on the mounts. What was your second
on
question?
the symbols, the chinha they call them,
the symbols,
the signs, yeah.
In the Indian textbooks, and yours, where did I put yours? Let me show everybody yours. They've already seen yours. There's a whole bunch of symbols which I found again unwieldy and basically unusable. And I've met other Indian hand readers, and we've talked about things, and then they've shown me whatever written material they have. A lot of times it was just, like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Pages there, whatever they are, they're just pages in a folder. And again, like eighth iteration copies of a poor copying machine. And I'm looking at them together, and then they would say, if you see the basket and the tip is this way, the second daughter disgraces the family. Okay. But if the basket is tipped this way, the first son is very successful. So, okay. So I was a literature major in college. That's my college degree. And I look at things like that. If this were a book by some famous author, and the guy saw a palmist, the protagonist saw a palmist somewhere in the book, and the palmist told him about the basket tipped this way. In literature class, we wouldn't consider this to be what actually happened. This is a novel. But why did the author have a 2-page thing with the basket tipping this way? What other times were there baskets in War and Peace, whatever gigantic novel we're reading? What does the basket symbolize? What is it part of in the era? What does baskets in that era mean compared? Nowadays, baskets mean this, but in 1400, maybe. So anyway, what I'm thinking is when I read all that stuff in different books, and there's little tidbits in this one as well from you and other places, I'm not steeped in Vedic literature. Maybe if I were as well read in Vedic literature as I am in British and American 1800s literature because of my college training, maybe I'd recognize that right off. Oh, that's Dickens. Oh yeah, that's right out of Dickens. That's such a character. Maybe if I knew what the character was, there's symbolism there that would be so brilliant, but it's lost to me. So I don't know what to do with those things when I see it in somebody's hands. I revert back to the system that I use, which I do know, and I feel.
I'm really curious to get your take on all this stuff. It's just nice to ask you. Just before we get into the fingerprints a little bit more, because I'd like to sort of do a little bit of work on that before we finish up. What about the timelines? What about you're going to live 100 years, you're going to live 200 years, all that kind of thing. Any sort of timelines you found to work, or is it something you work with yourself, or again, it's not really useful for you?
So no, I don't find it useful. So I have a lot more I could say about it. In palmistry literature, they talk about the timing of stuff all the time. I don't know any hand readers who say how long you're going to live by looking at your lifeline. And as an aside, there was an article in the AMA journal, the most prestigious medical journal in North America, back in the 1950s, where they measured the length of the lifeline and compared it to the age of death of the cadavers whose hands they were looking at, and happily concluded that there's nothing to palmistry. What kind of science is that? First of all, they were measuring the wrong line. Secondly, there aren't any hand readers who think it says how long you're going to live. Thirdly, blah, 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 blah. That's not science. You're not supposed to happily conclude anything. You're supposed to, gather the facts and come to your conclusion. Maybe they had a pre-existing conclusion that they went in any event. So I don't find that useful. And also, I don't do any predicting whatsoever. Let's say I was looking at your hands, and let's say I saw an accident in 5 years. Again, I don't do this at all, at all. But there are palmistry books where I know that so-and-so, if he was looking at your hand, having read his book, he would have said, you've got an accident coming up in 5 years. and he thinks it's your job to help you by protecting you. Really? How's that going to help the guy? I don't, you know, Cairo, one of the most famous hand readers of all time, supposedly told somebody that they were going to drown on the Titanic. He's going to drown, and goes on the Titanic and drowns. And then Cairo goes all around saying, I'm a genius. I told him he was going to drown, and then he's on the Titanic, and I told him. Huh? This is stupid. And not only is it stupid, it allows the people who want to make fun of hand reading, it gives them extra fuel. And, you know, I met a lot of people who tell me this is stupid, it's hand reading, it's wrong, you shouldn't be telling people this stuff. And I said, what's up? Oh, how long they're going to live, about their accents? I don't tell them that. Oh, yeah, that's what palmists do. How do you know that's what palmists do? Have you researched it? Do you know any palmists? And do you know palmists who tell them that? No, but I know. How do you know? Well, I just know. So you're going to say you just know, and that's your argument against what I'm doing? You're telling me that my career is invalid because you just know? Mm. Now, again, research it. Tell me that you have a better way of doing this. You tell me that what I'm telling people doesn't help them. I'm eager to hear your take. Maybe I can improve what I'm doing. But no, I just know is not an answer. And the AMA journal saying we just know, and this is foolish nonsense, we just know, that's not science. So the very people who are saying to me that what I'm doing is not scientific, this is their science. By the way, if anybody's just listening to the audio, I'm shaking my hands like crazy in the air.
Okay, so now that we've established that, that's interesting. So it's kind of like these are the things that interested me when I was doing it, and I kind of wanted to get more confirmation on that. A lot of, I mean, most of my experience has been in India, Sri Lanka. So those are the kind of people I was working with and watching what they were doing, and those things were important for them. So, okay, so that aside, let's talk a little bit about the fingerprints, because obviously this is something you've become or are a specialist in. So I'd recommend everyone got the book Life Prints and read it anyway, and then you can sort of judge for yourself better, because it's a lot of, there we go. So I guess it would be just nice to introduce to people about what we're kind of looking for. So you're working with like the arches, tented arches, the whorls, the loops. I mean, anything that you can sort of share about.
Yes.
Well, just before I ask, this is the really important thing. Obviously, I've noticed so when I was in India, a lot of people more had the sort of the whorls and the spirals I was seeing than the tents. You know, I found that the loops have been more prevalent in Western people I'm looking at. So I just wondered, have you come across anything like that? Is there any observations you've made in regard to, like density of population? You see more things someplace, somewhere else? And
so when I started to research fingerprints, which was 1979, I started in Houston's medical library. Houston has a gigantic medical library. It's one of the medical centers Houston and Dallas are two of the medical centers of the world, gigantic medical centers. In any event, that afforded me the opportunity to do research. And when I started, again, 1979, there were over 6,000 articles in the library I was in medical journals on fingerprint research. So that's now almost 50 years ago. And so there's more articles written. And that didn't even include the articles in German, Chinese, etc., which have not been translated at that point in history. There were thousands of research articles on different fingerprints and how it correlates with different medical and psychological conditions. What? This is a treasure trove. Again, I've got this gigantic library of palmistry books. I've read pretty much everything ever written in English on palmistry. And now I'm finding that there's another library with more than I've read. I was like a child in a candy factory. Wow, I've got all this to read. So a percentage of it, what a percentage, 10%, 15%, is about population studies. In other words, the Brahmins of this county of northern India, what percentage of them have whorls, loops, arches, etc., compared to the Brahmins in southern India, and do the percentages correlate, and how does that correspond to the percentages in Africa of the descendants of this group who migrate. But there's tons of this stuff and been studied enormously. And different population subcultures have different percentage of the different fingerprints. That's not particularly important to the work I'm doing. In the work I'm doing, how many of each type you have, it does come into the equation. But you need to look at all 10 fingerprints to know what the story is. No one fingerprint means anything by itself. To say that this fingerprint on this finger means X, not if you don't know what the other 9 are. It's like taking one word out of a paragraph. What does this word, R-E-A-D, does it mean I read the book? Does it mean read? Does it mean what does it mean? Without the sentence, without the paragraph, you have no context. So in the system that I teach and the people I've trained and what they teach their students as well, is you have to look at all 10 fingerprints. You make a fingerprint chart, the 10 fingerprints, 5 on the right hand, 5 on the left hand. There's also fingerprints over the palmar surface, separate topic. And it spells out, it's not that hard to learn, but it would take me a couple of hours to explain it. It spells out both a life purpose and a life lesson. The life purpose is what you came to do that would make you feel that your life is most meaningful. It's not what you're good at or even what you're inclined towards doing. A lot of people, the majority of people who are in leadership-oriented life purpose never seek out positions of authority. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them hate those in authority. And yet their deepest meaning point is in the leadership arena. How ironic. And there are others who have life purposes that are self-developmental or emotion-based or family-based, et cetera, et cetera. In the fingerprints is also your life lesson, which by definition, that's just a title I made for that, which is your shadow, your blindest blind spot, and that's already marked in your fingerprints prior to birth. There's parallels to stuff in astrology. It's not as precisely indicated as it is in the hands, I don't believe. In any event, I've got that map from prior to birth. And if you've got a preponderance of worlds, if you've got 7, 8, 9, or 10 of those circle patterns, I do know a lot about what your life entails, regardless of where they show up on your fingers. If you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 arches, I know a lot about what's going on in your life. And you had those while you were in the womb. What I don't know is how you've learned to navigate those choppy waters. You could be an excellent navigator, in which case you learned a lot by going through these types of very specific difficulties. If you come out the other side, you're in great position to lead others through similar difficulties, if you don't drown in the process, if it doesn't kill you.
Okay. So I guess, I mean, I'll put up some, maybe put up a few graphics from the book just to show what we were discussing and for the benefits of people that don't maybe know these individual prints. So you've got like this sort of the mound, and you've got like this sort of tented arch in the center, and you've got whorls, and in the book you talk about the subset of whorls. You've got the sort of the yin and yang symbol with the sort of opposing circular ones, and then you've got the I forget the name you use. Is it because you've got like it's almost like it's a triangular base.
Perpendicular sign.
Yeah. So
tented arches. And the tented arches represent just under 5% of the populations of what fingerprints appear on the planet. So in other words, I need to get 2 people, that's 20 fingerprints on average, to see 1 tented arch. So if you have 2 tented arches, you have like 4 times the average number of tented arches. That's a lot of tented arches. So I know the theme that goes with tented arches is quite prevalent in your life. How that expresses itself, which fingers those tented arches are on, is important. But then I could see your hand shape. I could see your line formations. And now I have a story that's, in effect, I've triangulated like the guys with the little machines, and they figure out what room the terrorist is in because they triangulated the electronic signals. So once I got the lines, the hand shape, and the fingerprints, I can triangulate with you and have a very good idea about what's going on if things are well. I don't know if things are well. I can guess, but I don't know. If things are well, it looks like this. If things are super well, it looks like that. If things are terrible, well, I know what terrible is for you, and I know how you got into terrible. And therefore, if you can retrace your steps out, I know what it would take to get you out of terrible. Whether you're in terrible or not, again, maybe you found God just yesterday.
Interesting. Yeah, when you were talking about the fact that these patterns are established so early, it got me thinking about. I'm quite interested in iridology as well. You know, the sort of study of the iris. I think it's the same thing. So, like 5, 6 months prior to birth, the patterns in the iris are already formed. So there are this sort of holographic signals on the body, aren't they? They sort of impress themselves in certain places, and these are sort of set patterns, these underlying sort of trends that we're carrying with us genetically.
So if you go to a large psychic fair or the Whole Life Expo in the US, where there are like 100 different providers of esoteric services, the longest lines are for the hand reader and the iridologist. And there's something fascinating just to watch from a distance, to see the iridologist look at things. And there's something the same with the hand reader. There's like an intimacy, there's a presence, there's a mesmerizing magicalness to it. They're looking at, you can't hear a word, you're at a distance. You can't hear what's saying, but you could see the interaction between the two people. And you just know that what the hand reader is going to say is very personal and moving to the readee. Same with the iridologist. And it's different than somebody reading your aura, let's say. And maybe the aura reader is excellent. Maybe the aura reader is terrible. Maybe they're just making stupid stuff up and then telling you that if you follow this religion, your life will be good, and if you don't, you're doomed. Who knows what they're doing? But there's something very grounded and real that hand reading represents, and from a distance, you can just see it. And people, also the people who would make the most fun of me, especially back in Texas, and make Yahoo sounds and, you know, wave their beer stein and their Yahoo hat. Even the biggest Yahoos who are making fun of me might still come up afterward and say, could you tell me about this stuff? There is that feeling that's, yes, the way I am this has to represent me. I mean, what's here doesn't represent you. What's here has to be like a part of me, doesn't it? Yeah.
Looking through your book, there was that short section you've got on the patterns appearing on the palm itself. So the detection of whirls as seen on the sort of, I think it was the Venus, Mars, and the Mercury mound. Was it the
moon? You can't get a whirl. You can get a whirl on the Mercury mound, but it's rare. And if it happens, it's a gigantic deal. I mean, your whole reading is going to be about what you're doing with that whirl on your Mercury mound. You know, to get a whirl down here is not statistically, I don't know if there's numbers on that. 2 per 1,000, 3 per 1,000.
You're saying in the book, if you see that, it's almost like that suddenly becomes a major category, and you should concentrate on that and not disregard
the center of your reading. It's the center of the person's reading.
Right.
So if there was a whirl over here, to me, that's my nickname for that is the reluctant messenger. And I've seen it on people who were book editors who were helping other people become messengers. I've seen it on people who had centers where they invited speakers and then they did the introduction, and here's Fred, he's going to talk to you about this. So they were so close to being the message deliverer themselves. And there's one person I've known for 4 decades, and she started out being very shy. And then, she had this inheritance, she had this huge house, and she would have people at her huge house. She would have salons, and there'd be 30 or 40 people in the audience. And then she'd have some speaker from some foreign country or a speaker on a weird topic like hand reading or something like that. And inch by inch, remember, she had the reluctant messenger in her hand. Inch by inch, her introductions got a little longer. And pretty soon she was doing 20 or 30-minute introductions. I've read the book, and then this is what I learned. And this is what she wanted the microphone all along, but she was so shy. She was reluctant to own herself as the messenger. So I lost track of her a couple of decades ago now, and I don't know what she's doing. But there was that in her hands when I first met her, and she was, the younger version of herself. And whether she became a message delivery person, maybe she became a lecturer, maybe she became a podcaster, maybe she wrote a book, maybe she did none of the above.
Right.
But her story was going to be about that. And the more she did none of the above, the more she wasn't going to like whatever else she was up to. And it didn't matter whether they gave her a raise in the corner office, she wouldn't be happy there. Unless, of course, she grabbed the microphone and started to speak at the board meetings.
But what elevates those palm signals above the fingerprint signals? Why would the palm?
They are part of the fingerprints. The statistical unlikelihood, when something appears in the hand and it's 2 or 3 per thousand, think of how many guys at the palmistry factory had to rearrange all that they were doing and get the equipment to build that over there, because you can't really get that too often. Whenever I find something that's rare like that, I elevate it in importance. It's just the hand is going way out of its way to tell a story about, in that case.
Okay. I think just before we wrap up, there's one just it's too big a subject, but just very quickly, if you could just touch on it. How about the big issue of the left and the right hand? Which one is going to dominate your?
I don't use it that much. A lot of palmistry books focus on that. I found when I tried to do that, it didn't help the reading. It wasn't accurate. It was occasionally accurate, but a lot of times it wasn't. And even when it was accurate, it didn't help the reading. It didn't help the person understand themselves better. The right is supposed to be what you made of yourself, and the left is what you started with, to oversimplify. But I found that the left hand kept changing. I take sequential handprints of people, and a new line grew in, or another line is going this way now, and it wasn't going that way before. And the left hand changes as much as the right. So that's apparently not what you started with. And there's different ways to play with it. But in general, I don't. It's like 2 cameras. I like to tell my students there's 2 cameras on the same scene. And in general, if Fred just stole the diamonds from the vault, you're going to see it on both cameras. Okay. There are people where the right hand and the left hand look like they're 2 different people, like they don't belong with each other. And in that case, maybe on the one hand, you're this way, Bob, but on the other hand, you're that way. I guess with your first wife, you were this way, but then with your second through 11th wife, you were that way. And I find that curious, but in general, small potatoes.
Okay, great. Richard, fantastic. So just in rounding up, how do people get hold of you? I mean, what sort of courses are you running? How often are you running? Are you doing one-to-one, or is it digital? Are you doing it over the internet, or just any material that you're currently offering?
Yeah, I'm not teaching beginner classes anymore, but people I've trained are. Handanalysis.net, people can go there, or just write me. I'm glad to either converse or answer emails. Richard at lifeprints.com, that's the title of the book. Lifeprints, PRINTS.com. Just write me. And I'll write you back. I'm a big believer in human contact. I hate businesses where you can't get a human on the phone or to talk to at all.
Yeah, totally.
They do something, it's not what you ordered, and now there's like this labyrinth of 99 things to go through, and I'd rather just here, keep my money. I'm just going to go someplace else. But I'm a big believer in human contact. And if people are interested in hands, I'm glad to talk to them. Write me, I'll talk to you.
If somebody wants a reading with you, how do they go about that? Just
email me, and I'll give them the specifics. Sure.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I highly recommend the book. There's lots and lots of. When I was doing a little bit of research before we spoke, I watched lots of your videos. There's plenty on the internet, so avail yourself of all those nice free videos. You can see talking about. There's quite a variety of subjects because you're being interviewed by such a variety of different people who've got different slants. So everyone's got their kind of take on it. So there's lots to see and listen to out there. There's the book, the courses. I'll put up the contact details as we're talking.
Well, I really want to be a spokesperson for hand analysis. I'm setting up my goal this year to be on a couple of podcasts at least every week. I want the world to know that this exists, and it's a super powerful, specific, and inspirational source of information about yourself. The world needs to know about this.
Definitely. Okay, well, I'll leave it there. Thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk about hands.